It helps if you turn the mic on. It also helps if you start the recorder and you get some sound going through the system. Welcome back to the world famous Jiggy Jaguar radio broadcast, coast to coast, border to border. Tune in, iTunes Radio Loyalty. And of course, iHeartRadio, AMFM247.com, all that fun stuff. Coast to coast and border to border. We're just going to get this out of the way right now. This is a continuing edition of our indie wrestling monologue series, where I share all sorts of secrets and all sorts of stuff about indie wrestling that I have had to keep my mouth shut for I don't know how long. We've highlighted in the past. We started with the Lance Tommy Snow feud. We talked about Burgess Francois Martin. We talked about Lance Chafin, the Midwest of Mangala. We talked about Billy Simmons. And this week we talk about my good friend Dan Adams from Bad Boys of Professional Wrestling. BBOW. I have known Dan for since the early 2000s. And I respect the hell out of Dan. I love Dan. And Dan and I have worked together on several different occasions here and there. At one point, before the split with Total Action Zone Wrestling, I had went out and invested a ton of money into DVDs and DVD cases, which have sat in the video editing room for 2 years. And, quite the deal, I'll have to say. And so that's how much I invest in the product, I'll have to say. I got involved with Dan Adams when he was doing Taz in Hoisington, Kansas, a couple years ago. And at one point, I had been talking with Mike Clares and Adam Pena and Mitch Bass, more or less Mike, because Mike kind of runs the show. In all seriousness, Mike Clares runs the show. Pena and Mitch might think they run the show. They don't. It's Mike. They might tell people they run the show. That's an on-screen character. Mike runs the show. As Miss Cleo used to say years ago, Mike's the daddy. So, I've known Dan for several years, and at one point, Dan was looking for a financial investor in Taz Wrestling. So, I put him and Mike together, and I tried to get them to have several meetings. And they went back and forth between Dan would call and leave messages, Mike would return the messages, they would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, they would have a meeting. And they then would, I guess, consummate this meeting, and they would make this stuff happen, and they were going to do this stuff. So then they started running shows. And Dan ran his shows in Hoisington. And then Mike ran the show here in Hutch. And then somewhere along the way, it got to be Taz and Hutch was Taz and Hutch, and Taz and Hoisington was Taz and Hoisington, and they never crossed each other for whatever weird reason. So, at one point, early on, I was not real happy with the arrangement. They had me doing social media, and I was doing video production, and all these things. And for whatever reason, and I don't know why this is, but whenever Mike, Mitch, and Pena come into a situation, they always try to root me out of there. I don't know why. They try to root me out somehow, some way. And so they were talking to me about, well, you know, what do you do for Dan? They had a big meeting with me one time. What do you do for Dan? And then they were giving me advice on different things and all these things. So then at one point, they had done a show where Lance had shown up at the show. And Lance just showed up out of nowhere. And I'm like, so who knew about this? And they're all like, oh, we all knew about it. And I'm like, well, this is kind of odd because I'm the social media guy and the video guy. I'm kind of part of the team. So nobody bothered to tell me. So I kind of knew there was something going on there. Well, then at one point, I had promoted an MWE show that Lunatic Lenny from Taz was wrestling on the Taz Facebook page because I thought we were all buddy and we were all woo. So then at one point, Mitch decides that he's going to call me on the phone. He's going to tell me how it is, brother. So I was not going to put up with that phone call. I was not going to have him tell me how it was when he just became part of this company, I don't know, a week ago. So I'm like, okay, we're done. So I left Taz and everything. Well, years and years, I watched this thing go off the tracks. I had made a prediction that they would not be in the wrestling business by the summer of the next year. And I was right. They'd gotten out of the business with Taz by the next summer. So the next summer rolls around and they're nowhere to be found. Now, of course, they're doing Pena Championship Wrestling, and we'll get to that later. And that's fine. I still want to know what the hell did I do to Adam Pena? We're going to ask that question when we do that segment. So, because I'm a cancer, apparently. So, pro wrestling. I always thought me and Pena were boys. I always thought we were buddies. Out of the three of them, I thought me and Pena were tight. I always thought Mitch had no use for me whatsoever, although he acted like he did, but whatever. But we'll get to that. We'll get to all that in due time. That's coming. That shoot is coming. Shooting's coming, baby. So we got to, I wish Dan well, set him on down the road. Well, I watched them do these shows in Hutch where they had little to no advertising but social media. Well, here's the deal. Unless you like the Taz Facebook page, or you are friends with Pena, or friends with Mike, or friends with Mitch, or friends with Burgess, you don't know this is going on. They were renting a building from the same people who own all the LED signs in town. You're telling me you didn't call them up once and say, hey, could you give us a deal on the signs? We are renting your building. Or something. They didn't put any flyers up. They did put some flyers up, and then I hear later that they were driving around town yanking Lance's flyers down when he would have his shows. And I'm like, if you can do that, why don't you put a flyer up? Or if you're yanking a flyer down, put one of yours in its place. So, I don't know. It got to be such a circus. And then I heard some stories about Abyss when they did the Abyss thing. It's just nuts. So essentially at the end of this whole thing, they had been angling from various screenshots and various things that they had talked about, and they were Taz, all this stuff. And then at one point, Lance yanked the company out from underneath all of them. I still don't really know what that was about. To this day, I still don't really know what that was about. But one thing that did come out of that, which I find just absolutely amazing that this would come out of that. While everybody and the brother was going, well, Lance is a prick, Lance stole the company, oh my God, Lance. And then I would talk to other people who were like, well, Dan should have handled his business. He should have copywrote the name. He could have done this, he could have done that, and blah, blah, blah. what's funny is that the Samoan Predator and I had a conversation at a show one time, and he's like, when I was watching all that back and forth, he's like, I immediately knew what I needed to do. He goes, I needed to go out, trademark my name, get my visage taken care of, get everything service marked and ready to go. And he goes, when I did that, that opened such a new world for me. It opened a new world of merchandise and t-shirts and photos and all the stuff. And he goes, I'm getting all these bookings now. He goes, I'm getting so many bookings that I might not even be able to wrestle on all of them. I'm getting bookings in Texas, California, Florida, all over these places. So, getting back to Dan, to finish up with Dan, Dan just wants to be a wrestling promoter. That's all he wants to do. He just wants to be a wrestling promoter. And so that's what he's doing now. And he's gotten hooked up with Ed Beckley. They're doing Bad Boys of Professional Wrestling, which actually that brand is got a little bit of a history to it. And they're making stuff work. The bottom line is that I kind of look at it as me and Dan have been wrestling family, I guess. You might fight back and forth, but at the end of the day, you get back together and it's not a big deal. So there's that. I think that some of the things that were done with the fact that they would do these shows in Hutch and they wouldn't promote them, and they would do them on days like Sundays during the NFL season. What? And they would do them on they would do them on days when they knew there was other things going on in town, or they would do these shows. I think some of the stuff that they did to Dan, I think, was absolutely atrocious from a wrestling promoter marketing standpoint. The thing is that Mike, Mitch, and Pena are not dumb. These guys are master marketers. Why couldn't they get the wrestling thing? I don't understand it. Doesn't matter. We're moving on. So, there you go. We are going to take a break. And when we come back, who knows what we're going to do. But we're going to do something. We got more coming up.